How does the arrest and deportation of one immigrant have the potential to rattle and roil the stock market and the economy even more than it already is? Does it sound too ridiculous to be true? Well, it's not as far fetched as you might think. So, what are we talking about here? We're talking about this case that's currently ongoing of a Salvadorian immigrant named Kilmar Abrego Garcia, right? And he was living in Maryland, and on March 15th, 2025, in a ICE sweep, Immigrations and Customs sweep, he was picked up and he was deported back to El Salvador, right? Now, he hadn't done anything wrong. He had not broken any laws. He had not done the things that the administration had accused him of, mainly being this kingpin in MS-13, a Latin American gang that operates in the United States. Anyway, there's no proof that he was or did any of those things. However, the administration says, whoops, that was an administrative error. So sorry. But you know what? It's beyond our control now. And Mr. Abrego Garcia is just going to have to take it and sit in this black site prison in El Salvador. Okay, let's just take away the politics and whatever you may think of that aside. Forget about that. The thing that really matters is the fact that last week the Supreme Court came down and said, no, you have to go facilitate the return of this guy back to the United States. And if he has broken any laws or if he has done anything that would have violated his immigration status, then we'll deal with that. But due process says he's got to come back here to the U.S. to face any charges or to stand before a judge so we can sort this whole thing out. And what the Trump administration has said is, you know what, we're not going to do that. The Supreme Court said you have to do this, and the executive branch said we're not going to do that. Therein lies the crisis, right? And some people will call this a constitutional crisis. Other people will just roll their eyes at the thought of that. But here's the problem. The Constitution has broken up our government into three separate but equal branches. The executive, headed by the president, the legislative with Congress, and the judiciary, which is at the very top, the Supreme Court, right? And they all can check and balance each other. So if one does one thing, the other branches can always step in and stop them from unilaterally doing anything. It's a very well-conceived and time-tested system of checks and balances, so one branch does not get more power or too much power than the others. The problem is the judiciary has just told the executive, here's what you must do, and the executive is saying, we're not going to do that. Why does that matter to the markets? Here's the problem. The reason that the U.S. markets are so held in high esteem and they are seen as the place to put your money, to invest your money, is because we have the rule of law, right? The rule of law says the government can't just come in willy-nilly and seize your money, seize your business, seize your house. We have to go through this thing called due process, where you work your way through the courts if you've done something wrong, and then the judiciary will remove those rights as they see fit per the guidelines that have been the basis of the law for the last 250 years. If we lose that protection, if we lose the protection of rule of law, then we are sliding a lot closer to, some would say, like a China. In China, there is no rule of law to speak of where you are protected from the executive from coming in and doing anything they want. The Chinese Communist Party can come in and seize your house and seize your business and seize your bank and seize your assets. They can do whatever they want. You have very little rights as an individual citizen in that situation. That's why Chinese companies are not seen as good of investments as American companies, why the Chinese markets are seen as riskier than the American markets. The American markets have always been the safe haven for where you park your money, put your investments, and watch them grow because those investments are sheltered by the rule of law. Right now, investors all over the world are watching this showdown between the judiciary, the Supreme Court, and the executive, the White House. And they're saying, what's the rule of law? Is there any rule of law anymore? Because if there's no rule of law anymore, if the executive can just do whatever they want, if the president can do whatever he wants, if that whole branch of government is not beholden to anyone else anymore, then rule of law is going to start to get shaky. And the prospect of parking your money in the United States is not as safe anymore. It's not as safe anymore because what if the executive branch comes in and says, you know what? We don't like you. We don't like where you come from. We don't like your politics. We don't like what you've said. And we're just going to seize your assets, seize your house, seize your business, kick you out of the country, take your money. Well, now we're no more safe a place to park your investments than a China is, right? So investors all over the world are watching very closely what's going to happen with this Abrego Garcia immigration, deportation, El Salvador Supreme Court, Donald Trump showdown, because everyone wants to know what is the status of the rule of law in the United States, and are investments going to be safe there in the future? Something to think about. Do good things. We'll talk next time.